Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Justin Charles. Use he, him pronouns. I'm a member of New York City DSA, the DSA Emerge Caucus. I'm also a member of DSA's National Political Committee. This is the second session in our ongoing series about continuing the political revolution put on by New York City DSA and our New York City local of the Afro-Socialists and Socialists of Color Caucus. Earlier today, we had heard Celia Weaver, joined by tenant organizers and activists fighting for decommodified housing. For many of us in DSA, the best thing about the Sanders race was the new convergence of unions and movement groups, coalition including Dream Defenders, National Nurses United, Ethiopian packinghouse workers and tenant organizers from Kansas City, Miss Major, and the Sunrise Movement. We'd like to build on this convergence by making it more formal, more durable for the long haul, and more capable of being retooled for non-electoral organizing. We also want to engender more comradely discussion around big strategic questions across organizations as well as within them. And so this discussion on Black politics, Black Lives Matter, and the political revolution is just one part of that. So before I get into the specifics of this panel, I wanted to encourage everyone watching to please check out the Facebook event and the Eventbrite registration for not just this panel, but the whole speaker series. If you throw your contact info into the Eventbrite below, you'll be able to receive more information and updates about the panels that'll be coming up over the next 2 weekends. This panel in particular centers on a few urgent questions we think are critical for all working class people in this country. What's next for the new and historic movement for Black lives? What happened with Black voters in the Sanders campaign? What should we make of the attacks on multiracial solidarity and movement demands from the key players in the Black political class? What's the place of Black Lives Matter in the political revolution to come? So to discuss all of this and more, I'm joined by a great panel. We have Jabari Brisport, our presumptive socialist state senator from Brooklyn, longtime DSA member and teacher with UFT and the Movement of Rank and File Educators Caucus. Joined by Danelli Rodriguez. Danelli is a member of Free Black Radicals, Queens DSA, the Afro-Socialist Caucus, and New York City DSA's defund committee of the Racial Justice Working Group. Danelli is also a tenant organizer and activist. Joined by Cheryl Rivera, who is on NYC DSA's Abolition Action Group, also a member of the Racial Justice Working Group's defund committee, and a member of the National Abolitionist Working Group as well. And we'll be joined a little bit later by Bianca Cunningham, former co-chair of NYC DSA, staffer at Labor Notes, and a member of Free Black Radicals. So as the conversation unfolds, please do post your thoughts and questions in the chat below. One of our moderators will try to flag some for us on the panel to discuss. But without further ado, let's get into the discussion. So this is kind of an open question to the whole panel, but it's been a turbulent, taxing year for the world, especially for the working class, and in this country, working class Black people. But for all that's happened, the ratcheting up of right-wing political violence, racist vigilantism, police impunity, and disparities within disparities that bring the weight of COVID and economic recessions onto the back of Black people this year has also been tremendously exciting in the new movement in the streets, and increasingly also in workplaces across the country. What's your read on where the movement is right now and where it needs to be going? What have we accomplished thus far? What's next on the agenda? And what challenges do we need to overcome? Floor is yours. Who wants to jump on this first?
Yeah, I think I'll take a stab at it. So with respect to where we are in the movement, I think we're in a pretty critical juncture, right? with the protests going on in the street. We've been protesting for, I would say, like now the last 130 days or so, 4 months it's been, give or take. And we've had, several victories, right? But they've been superficial at best, right? We're fighting for abolition, and what abolition means, right? Redefining public safety. So at this point in juncture, we've seen things like the repeal of 50A. We've seen sort of these like short half measures for defunding the police, but really like budgetary sleight of hands have been going on here specifically in New York City in our city council. But pressure has been mounting on our elected officials. We've been making distinctions about who is in line with our interests and who are not. Right, people are becoming more aware. You're starting to see political education in the streets. We're starting to see a greater sense of class awareness and political consciousness in young Black leaders throughout New York City. And I think that we're in a place where the activism and the protesting is tenfold. Right, you see a lot of it happening, and right now there's a critical debate going on the ground about to what effect are these protests are bringing us change, right? Meaningful, substantial change. And right now, a lot of the organizers are thinking about how we can start actually using these protests as a greater source of power. How do we build that power? How can that power be not just power on the ground to make noise about the situation, but also see that power reflected in the legislature, right? And in our politics. So we've seen a lot of successes, but I think that moving forward, we're going to need to think long and hard about how to strategically target, our politicians, how to get politicians in power who align with our class, right? Because there's a lot of people in the legislature right now who identify with defunding the NYPD, who identify with abolition, but are fundamentally working against our class interests by taking, funds from police, by taking funds from real estate developers and things of this nature. So I think right now you're seeing the political education on the ground that's necessary to get us to the space where we can start identifying our class position as Black, activists on the ground right now. And that's the hurdle, right? Because a lot of us are new to this, right? A lot of us don't have this political education, don't understand our class position. But that's the essence of this work right now, is really educating ourselves, implementing things like mutual aid, right? Which you see occurring. I was part of Occupy City Hall, and after they kicked us out of Occupy City Hall, we were in the process of establishing affinity groups, right? When they kicked us out of Occupy City Hall, these affinity groups basically spread out throughout the city and started doing mutual aid in their respective neighborhoods. They started doing political education in their respective neighborhoods. They started doing protests, throughout the city, not just at Occupy, and really merging different people from around the city into the same space. So that's kind of what the space looks like. And I think that it's a critical time now, because now we need to, formally build a coalition around these efforts and around these spaces, and do so in a way that is actually internally democratic, so we can sustain this movement long term, right? Because a lot of the transgressions that we had in the past with BLM has been that a lot of people were excited about jumping in, right, into this activism. But it was just that, it was just activism. There was no strategy, there was no tactics. But I think right now we're in that space where a lot of this is coalescing, and we can really launch ourselves off into a really great space. And the defund NYPD committee in DSA is taking up that responsibility right now.
Thanks, Donnelly. Anybody else want to jump in on this question?
Are you gonna take it first, or?
Sorry, Javar, I saw you unmute, and I was like, let me not be rude, but before we go, quickly, I agree with what Danny just said. I see us going, I see kind of two ways that we're moving right now. And this is both like a hope and also like what I am seeing happening, but also like a fervent hope that this is where we're going, that we keep moving this direction, which is like building the solidarity between the different segments of the movement, like understanding how this is all connected in one fight. And that is building that like class consciousness, building this understanding between us, like how does the housing connect with the healthcare, connect with education, labor organizing, immigration, and how this is all connected. Like for me, I'm an abolitionist, and my framework is an abolitionist framework, which encompasses all these things, because abolition is about changing everything. And so I think it's no surprise that we're seeing this mass movement come out of a march against police violence, which then led us to understanding the way that we are just policed in our society in general, and that the structure of policing is necessary to building this like totally terrible society we have. Like it's baked in, and all of these things are connected. So people are coming into this consciousness through the entryway of protesting against one thing that may seem very specific, which is like police violence, which then turns out to be a bedrock foundational thing for this entire racial capitalist, like white supremacist society and system. And so coming around to understanding how everything is connected and having solidarity between these fights that may have seemed separate, now seeing how they are actually interconnected, and we are all interdependent. So I see us building that kind of understanding, that consciousness through the political education that's happening, through just literally being together. You're encountering a lot of new people. You're encountering the housing people are encountering the immigration people, like this, everyone's like meeting each other in the street here. And then I see this movement also, I agree that like we are putting legislators and stuff into power, putting people into elected positions of power who align with us. But I see also this movement building a sense of power that exists outside of those structures, because people don't have a lot of trust in them right now. So at the same time that I think people are still like, let's vote some people in that we agree with, we have this big question in the streets of like, and then what else can we ourselves like do? Like people want to take that power on. They want to do things. They want to affect change, not just by I cast a vote, by also like doing action. So I see what we're grappling with right now is like some of the actions we've done is we've walked over many bridges. I don't want to walk over any more bridges. But now we're like, okay, so cool. What else are we going to do? There's something else other than walking across bridges and like voting. And we got to figure out like, what are these actions that we're going to do? Take that power, like leverage our collective power together. And it's a hard thing to answer because for a very long time, this type of power has really been out of our hands. Like it's been taken by the state. Like we're not used to exercising it. So it's a muscle we're like developing collectively together. And I think we're going to figure it out. But I think you'll see the nature of like the street action sort of changing as we try to figure out what is the thing that we need to do. What are the things that we need to do collectively beyond marching and beyond voting?
So I'm just going to add like stuff I'm excited about in the future of this movement. And like, I'm really glad, Cheryl was just talking about like, kind of bringing like things that a lot of people would say are disparate, but bringing them together and seeing how they're really interconnected. Because, what I'm really starting to see is with the notion of the defunding conversation, I saw shifting people to really look at like local budgets. And I know that can, seem like a boring thing for a lot of people, but, a budget that's where violence against the working class happens right there. And, one of my favorite images from the Occupy City Hall demonstration was the night of the budget vote, where people were just sitting down, like 100, 200 people just sitting down watching the city council vote on a budget, the way that people gather to watch like sports, other events like this. That's something I'd never seen in my life. And it was beautiful, if you can call it that. But, I think it's really important, like, one, as someone who seeks for justice, but also as a socialist, that people are waking up and looking at the way these budgets go down, because I think, the question starts to become like, yes, okay, define the police. And then also, like, we're looking at the budget and we're seeing like how, other areas of society are being screwed over by inequities, right? Saying, okay, well, why is the budget like education for, why is it like that? Why is it that amount? Why is the amount that we allocate to housing and healthcare that amount? And if we push further, especially, as socialists, the more people pay attention to how things are funded, we can start to look for, well, how much are people paying into the system, right? This notion of taxing the rich and saying we're going to put more money into it in the first place. On top of that, I feel is a logical next step. We can keep pushing the movement. So yes, we're defunding the police, reallocating that resources, and actually, you know what? There's more resources that are being kept off in vaults and in banks in the pockets of the 1%. And I think it's going to be a great way to like start to align class struggle with the deep racial politics in this movement. Which I'm like, I read this New York Times article saying that this year, the Black Lives Matter movement this year was one of the biggest in history. Like, not even of other Black Lives Matter movements, like all movements. Like the sheer percentage of Americans participating in it. So we are really ripe for social change right now, and it's going to be great to take advantage of it.
Thanks, everybody. So I guess kind of going off what Jabari was just saying, and what we were all talking about next steps. On the 5th anniversary of BLM, Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor said the movement had to move past protest towards mass politics, suggesting that one of the big obstacles that inhibited earlier iterations of this movement was that it had failed to develop any kind of, well, I guess, substantial internal democracy and organizational strength. The movement ignited, the consciousness of young people, but didn't produce many formal groups or active campaigns that people could really kind of settle in and develop through. And when there were groups, they would tend to be dominated by a few personalities. So taken together, we never really developed a sort of collective agency that was stewarded in previous moments by, groups like SNCC or CORE or the Black Panthers or the Communist Party. Do you agree with Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor's assessment that one of our biggest challenges has been the absence of formal internally democratic groups? If so, why do you think that that's been such a challenge? If not, why? And what is the kind of organization we need for this movement and for this moment? I think I'll go to Cheryl on this.
Oh, you're like, for the difficult question, Cheryl, what organization? So I have like some anarchist tendencies and started definitely at the beginning of this summer and stuff. I still have these tendencies. Boo me in the comments if you want. I'm like flat structures, like non-hierarchical, like settings, this kind of stuff. But as I've been out there over the last 6 months, with the pandemic starting, that, the work of the movement started before everyone was in the streets, I think, because we have to understand that this movement, I think, was also coming out of the fact that we're in this specific moment around this pandemic that has really devastated us. And so all the work of the last like 6 months or so, however long it's been in this hell zone, I've started to understand the importance of organization, which sounds silly for a person who's in an organization that, sends you a card that says you're an organizer. But truly now, the importance of organization I see. And I don't know if this means what kind of formal organization we need. Like, does it have to be like SNCC? Do we have to have like SNCC 2.0? But we are not, once again, accustomed to organizing ourselves collectively. This is not all our fault. The state has really taken away a lot of power from people. It's really invested a lot of resources in destroying these groups that existed in previous iterations of movements and alienating people from each other in society. I don't think, all across society you can see that people have less groups now than they did before. Not to be all bowling alone on you, but like we are just not accustomed to being in community with each other, maybe like we were before. So now we're relearning this, I think, in the past decade, and especially now very rapidly on the street, that we need to be organized in a community with each other to get the work done. Because I can't do it on my own. Like when you take on something too much on your own, you're going to burn out real fast. And there's some serious risk of burnout right now, serious risk of burnout for the movement in totality if we don't create like a little raft, like these, like y'all know fire ants, and they make these big old rafts to get across like rivers, like their little bodies together. We got to be like fire ants. So that doesn't really answer the question of what type of organization, but I just think one must be organized to move forward. And so I do agree with the assessment that something that was missing is organization. And I guess that must be somewhat formalized, and it must be democratic, because this is a people's movement. So we must democratically participate with each other. That causes a lot of frustration. I see that frustration coming out right now. It's frustrating to go maybe slower than you want to go on something because you need to talk to many more people than you might talk to if it's just you and 3 people, making decisions. But if we don't do that, we will end up once again rebuilding a world that maybe is not for all of us, that's only for some of us. So it's got to be democratic, and you've got to make the space, the time, and the container for this movement. How will we delegate this work? So my little anarchist tendencies, I'm like, yes, non-hierarchical, I like to rotate responsibility and stuff. However, we are going to have to be in organization with each other. We have to, we cannot just be individually fucking the system up. We have to be collectively fucking the system up. So I really come around to the idea that I don't know join an organization that works for you. It may be a small one or whatever, but then your small organization also needs to be in community with other organizations. That's how we create the life raft. I'm not saying you have to join the biggest organization, that fits for you. Maybe you want to join a smaller collective, but your collective needs to be in communication with other collectives so that we're building this network of power. And I think that's how we're going to win.
Jabari, what about you?
Yeah, I would just add, like, part of the challenge I see is that I think a lot of people have no experience in being inside of a democratically run organization. You ask somebody about how they when's the last time they voted on something, and it was probably for a political candidate, or that's their experience of democracy, is that they show up and vote on election day because they very likely are not in a worker-run co-op where they vote on things. They're very likely not even in a union in New York, and like you leave New York, forget about it. The union density is just it's just falling so rapidly. So I think a lot of people don't the notion of being inside of a group where you like actively participate and like vote on things and are a member that's part of the give and take of it is like a little bit alien to them, and so like doesn't even cross their minds. And like that's part of I want to say like challenge, but like opportunity that we are facing is that you have a chance to let people know, oh, you can actually be part of something that gives you more agency in your daily life. And I often find, people get really excited about how they can fight for things at like a local level and like, kind of take back their block. That really, really excites them. And I think, again, like Cheryl said, if you're collective or, or whatever, like if you're in something that allows you to like work democratically inside your local community, that's something that's really engaging for people, and that's a chance to bring them in. That's actually how I got involved in DSA. I attended a meeting, and the first meeting I went to, they were talking about this nasty rezoning in Crown Heights, Philly Bedford Union Armory, and I was like, oh, I can be part of a fight that's like against a nasty developer that's in basically my neighborhood's backyard. Oh, and I'm in a meeting where I have a say. It's not like so and so is the queen of DSA and tell me where to show up and when. It's like, oh no, I have a real opportunity to like be an active member with a voice in this organization that's doing some really great political work. And I think, as we build these structures, we make sure there's a chance for new people to not only come in, but also feel like they have a voice and they're not being told where to go, where to be. And, solely, and like making sure they feel like this is something they're a part of and something they're building too. Because I think that helps with like retention of people in the movement as well, and I think honestly builds it faster.
Donnelly, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree entirely with Cheryl and Jabari's points and Taylor's analysis here. I want to speak to my experience at Occupy City Hall, and there's so many layers to this, right? Because a lot of us, Black young activists who have just gotten started in organizing and really excited about this, there's a lot of raw energy from years and years and years of trauma, from police oppression, from gentrification, just lack of quality education and all of these things, right? Where finally now we're in a space within a movement where we can yell at the police, we can say FTP, right? And feel safe in doing that because we have people with us, right? With that said, that runs sometimes in tension with establishing internal democratic processes, because when people are so rawly expressing their emotions, right, and still in it, they've yet to sort of have that restorative process for themselves to get to a space where they can be like, okay, now we can work collectively. This is not just about me. This is not just about my trauma. This is not just about my internal experience and the injustices that I've experienced personally, right? And at Occupy City Hall, I saw a lot of this within the various different groups that coalesced within the space, right? It was a lot of infighting, as a consequence to how people felt, right? Because everyone had a stake in this. Everyone had a legitimate cause in this. Everyone had a valid reason to have a voice in this, right? But it was like, my voice is the loudest because I've been oppressed the most, and so on and so forth. So a part of this really comes down to, this is a consequence to, what Cheryl said earlier about lack of education, right? Because like, even me, I'm 32, I'm a law student, and maybe 2 years ago, I just started learning about class consciousness, right? I just started learning about my position within class, right? In addition to my position as a Black, Latino in New York City, right? So I had to learn that first and then learn democracy, right? Because I can't be in a space, a democratic space, unless I am aware of these things, right? And that's the challenge that we have before us now, right? And I think that in order for us to establish, some sort of organizational structures that are democratic, there's going to need to be a lot of sort of self-determination with respect to restoration and healing in our community, right? Because at the end of the day, in order to have a democratic process that is legitimate and valid, we need to have rapport with one another. We need to care about each other. We need to love each other, and we need to see each other as one another, right? Your struggle is my struggle. Your pain is my pain. And that's the only way we can have a democratic process that is true to what we're seeking here. Otherwise, it's just going to be a power battle, right? And who wins there? The capitalists win there. Capitalism wins there. The politicians who stand in line with those interests win there, because now we're in conflict with one another, right? So I think that, particularly with respect to the new young Black activists that are in this space, who have a lot of this raw energy, who are deeply excited, we need to start, thinking about how we can take care of each other, build deep, connections with one another, because we need that solidarity in order to have, a long-standing democratic process.
Thanks, Donnelly. I appreciate that you were talking about solidarity, because I think in this particular fight against, against police violence, we have two dynamics in which anti-Black racism is like definitely, a key foundation of police power, but the police ensnare all sorts of other groups of working class people, right? So as socialists, how do we thread the needle between the ways the movement is a struggle by and for Black people, and like unwaveringly that is true, and against this repressive power, but also kind of, puts forward a program that benefits many, if not all, working class people. How is the fight to defund the police, to take away police power, a solidaristic fight? And I want to hear from Jabari on this one first.
I mean, I'll just start by, I guess, stating the obvious, which is that, we're to defund the police citywide. You're defunding the police in every neighborhood. It's not like, taking on, defunding them in a certain spot. So it is like a fight that we all need to be in, because, we're advocating for fewer cops, not just in Brownsville, but also fewer cops in Upper West Side. Fewer cops in Crown Heights, but also fewer cops in Park Slope. And it is a group struggle, because the fact is, it affects all of us. It's solidarity too, because it's funny. My one of my scariest experiences with the cops happened when I was in college, where it was like 2006, and this cop grabbed my friend. It was a plainclothes police officer, grabbed my friend because he matched the profile of a suspected weed dealer in the neighborhood, and I was making a lot of noise, and it just because we didn't have smartphones, so I couldn't get a video. So I was trying to make sure there were witnesses. And I was like, where's your badge? But this, that, and I got too loud, and I guess I got too close because he put a gun in my face. And told me to back up. Of course, then after I backed up, the walkie-talkie comes through, and he finds out he has the wrong guy. But one, it's fucked up because one, he was willing to end my life over a suspected weed dealer. But two, the racial politics of this. Listen, this was a black cop. So there's a black cop willing to shoot me in the face over a weed dealer. And also, my friend was white. So we all know it's black people are disproportionately harmed by the police, but white people, if you're watching, you're not safe, from police violence. Any one of us, could be felled. So this is a solidarity struggle, because the violence that they inflict, it can happen to anybody. So there's that. And then also just understanding that this goes back to what we were saying earlier, is that when we are fighting against police brutality and reimagining these systems, it bleeds back into these universal demands. When we're saying we're taking money from the cops, we're saying, okay, we want to put it back into housing justice and healthcare justice and education justice. And these are things as well, solidarity that, transverse, one particular group or anything. These are things that we as a society benefit from, because when one group is uplifted and one group is more stable in their everyday life, or has the means to be more stable, then that uplifts all of society as a whole.
Finally.
Yeah, real talk. That's real. And here's the thing. When black people are safe, all people are safe. Period. When poor people are safe, all people are safe. Hopefully they won't be poor, and that's why they're safe. So when we talk about abolition, right, it's about redefining public safety. And all the pundits are like, well, it's going to be anarchy if we defund the police, if we get rid of policing, right? But, everyone's saying this, but the reality is, you want to look at a society without police, just go to any suburban community that's white in the country, and you will see that. You see investment in people's resources, investment in people's lives, investment in people's education, in housing, in healthcare. They don't have to worry about these things, right? So when we're talking about abolition, it's about redefining public safety. It means that safety is not, police in my hood. I've never felt safe a day in my life when a police officer is around. It's true for most black men and black women, right? I felt safe when I knew that I can pay rent at the end of the month. I felt safe when I knew that if I got sick, I didn't have to pay an inordinate amount of money just so that I can, be healthy. I felt safe when I didn't have to pay to go to school, to get an education, right? That's how I feel safe. That is what defunding the NYPD is. That's what defunding police is. That's what abolition is about, right? These things don't run in contrast to one another, right? And when these resources are invested into housing, into education, into healthcare, that helps everyone, point blank, period. right? When we're raising the bar for the most oppressed, we're increasing the safety for all of the world, right? When we talk about, criminality in the hood, that is a condition of poverty in the hood, right? When we talk about, gentrification and the people who live in the surrounding communities of the hoods and in the rich buildings, right? And in the luxury towers, right? If the hood was actually finance was invested in, if we had like a Green New Deal for public housing where, public housing tenants were trained to retrofit their homes and bring them up to a national standard, a new standard, right? That would have implications on the people living around them, right? They would be safer, they would be better, right? And I think this is the way that we need to frame, abolition. This is the way we need to frame the defund campaign, that it's not just about, Black justice. It's about, class justice and interclass justice, right? Working class and poor people working together to bring these resources to our people, because policing people has never kept people safe. It's only kept the wealthy and the elite safe, who already have all the resources in the world to do that themselves, right? But we need to finance and invest in the things, right, that do keep us all safe. And that's, basic right to housing, a basic right to education, a basic right to healthcare. And when we defund the police and invest in these things, society will reap the residual benefits of this reality.
Yeah, I want to go back to kind of like what Donnelly said about when, you fight for Black people, you really do fight for all people. Many years ago, I read something that really maybe changed me a lot and helped me understand my political orientation and helped guide me. Scott Nakagawa ran this blog called Race Files, and I remember reading a post he read, and in it he had said, "Anti-Black racism is the fulcrum of white supremacy." So anti-Blackness is a thing upon which white supremacy turns on, So this nation we live in, America, is a white supremacist nation. It is constructed this way from the very beginning. And from the beginning, the construction of American capitalism, I think foundationally it rests upon anti-Black racism, is my belief. So if you are an anti-capitalist in any way, a socialist, an anarchist, communist, and you want to dismantle these systems, this capitalist system, you're going to have to fight anti-Blackness. You're going to have to fight for Black people, because this system this anti-Black racism is embedded in it. It's necessary to it. So this is why the fight for Black lives, I think, really is central, because in this country, we really have created this category of Black people upon which you can dehumanize and you can do many things that are the category of people you measure everything else against. Like everyone else can become white but Black people. Everyone else, therefore, can enter into this category of people who are deserving of things. But crucially, white people and other non-Black people of color should understand that when they align themselves with Black people in their struggles, they can be kicked out of whiteness. Therefore, then you can be treated like Black people. To abolish this kind of dichotomy, the system, the way this is working, the punishment mechanism that capitalism has for everyone who is outside of the care of the system, and all Black people are in that category. But all of you other people could be in that category too, if you fuck around. So fuck around really is the thing there. So for us to escape this, we have to dismantle anti-Blackness. We have to be for Black lives. We have to center on Blackness in our movements. So that was a real learning for me, that seeing that this anti-Blackness was the fulcrum of white supremacy, and then understanding America and capitalism as being bound up in white supremacy and inextricable from it. So I think that's how we see that these fights are together. This is one fight. And if you are a socialist, you need to understand that. You need to reckon with it. We have to stop seeing something like Black Lives Matter as not like, oh, how can we connect this to like a socialist, a class movement? Because this is a class movement. You need to understand that.
and on Cheryl. So the occasion for this whole conference was thinking about the Bernie campaign and how it kind of coalesced all of these different groups around what Bernie was speaking to in his platform, including Dream Defenders, who helped make Trayvon Martin a household name and doggedly pursued justice for him and when nobody else would. But Bernie's race, largely failed because he couldn't win Black voters, particularly older Southern Black voters, but often Black voters in general. So what do you think happened there? What does this mean for the socialist left? That Bernie had this problem with Black voters. I think the socialist left will continue to encounter these problems. How are we going to, move beyond this kind of roadblock where demands that I think would benefit Black communities of color, but there's there's a wall that we're not getting through. We'll go to Cheryl first on this. Sorry to have you speak back to back.
Okay. Two things. One, we can't discount the work that has been done to really trash socialism, communism in our society, And so this didn't just affect Black people. There are plenty of white people who are like, I'm not trying to hear any of that. Like that's scary. No. But why are Black people in particular who are like, we ain't fucking with it? Well, Bernie should have said Black more. He should have said I'm fighting for Black people much more earlier. He should have said it louder. Also, I think there's some trust issues here in the Black community, and I don't think that's our fault because there have been other movements. Look at all the movements that have helped working class people in the past that have left out Black people. I am a supporter of unions, of course. I'm in a union. We can't not recognize the way that a lot of unions were created and explicitly left out Black people. So when you talk about like being for union organizing and stuff, there's a lot of older Black people that may remember having to fight to try to even get in one of them. There is just a history of like movements that have been supposedly mass movements that really left out Black people, left out the protections, for example, for domestic workers. That was something that had to be fought for long after protections for many other workers were got. And that was because at the time, domestic workers as a class were mostly Black. So this is why wasn't no one checking for their rights. So I think we have to recognize the way in which previous iterations of class movements, working class movements, have been racially segregated. And Black people may have some trust issues left over from that, from feeling that like white working class movements were not really for them. This is, I think, we're in a new age, but trust has to be built. And I think that's where we come back into like building community, reducing the alienation between each other that has been created over decades. So I think a lot of that affected the Bernie race. I think we can't also discount that this was something really new. This was, I can't even like, can you imagine that 10 years ago that it would have happened? So I think, our first efforts here maybe fell short, but I think it's still impressive. The amount of young Black people I meet who have become like activated on the left in the last few years. And I think there's some credit due to, of course, Bernie's campaign. I'm not gonna put all credit on him because I'm not an electoralist personally, but credit due where it is due.
Jabari, what do you think?
I'm actually piggyback on something Cheryl said about just the trust issues in the Black community, and just also add on yeah, I mean, there's been so many times where, Black people have been told they'll be sold the moon and the stars by politicians, only to have them like turn around, as soon as they got elected and fuck them over. And I think one really big critique I would have was that, Bernie Sanders tried to campaign, tried having this message, but, at the end of the day, he hadn't been there, he had not been in the South, he had not been in those communities. And they did not know him. Like, I remember in 2016, what really summed up for me, I was phone banking for Bernie, and I called this older woman in South Carolina. I was like, I'm phone banking for Bernie Sanders, and she was like, I don't know who that man is. She was like, I know who Hillary Clinton is. I know who that man is. I'm not voting for him. And I was like, but that's real. This sense of like, who is this person that just showed up? I don't care what he has to say. He hasn't been here for us. And, that ties into what we need to do as organizers, make sure we are in these communities and working alongside them. Because for some people, it's less about like you having the right thing to say, but more so the fact that they know you and they've built a camaraderie with you and they know they can trust you. Because honestly, there's truth in that. Anybody can say anything and then go do something else, right? So how are we like deeply involving in certain communities, making sure we're there and we're not just like, oh, we're here for the election, vote for us, but like we're actually there deeply and for the long term. So there's that, and then also just I would also say a big thing that Bernie failed to do was convince people that he was the best candidate to defeat Donald Trump, which is something I believe, but a lot of people were like, no, he's going to lose. They're going to call him a socialist, even though they're calling Biden a socialist. He's too old, even though Biden is old. So he could have done a better job of doing that. But that's like really real. I mean, like I got that in my race. People were saying you got to stop saying you're a socialist, Sabari. At least a lot of Black voters, they don't like that. And I was like, what are you talking about? There's this pervasive like hushedness of like, Black people are scared of the word. And they're not. Like actually, when I was running, like a couple like people. I'm a public school teacher, by the way, for people watching who don't know, and I teach at a public school in Crown Heights. And like once I was public, I was running, and like news articles came out. There were some older Black teachers at the school. They're like, "Yo, Jabari, I'm a socialist too," and that's not something we get a chance to like, give people the chance to afford them to say. We try to write off Black people as like not, with it, or more, people wrote off Black voters in the South as conservative, or like, or low information, when truthfully, like, Black people are, really fucking progressive, and in some cases they get really fucking pragmatic, and they'll say, I just want the person who can beat Trump the best, and like, I wish the campaign could have convinced not only that Bernie was the best candidate to beat Trump, but also the message that he was fighting for is the best thing. That truly the world we are fighting for is something that, it can be different this time, because I think a lot of people are kind of jaded too about whether or not our ideas can work, that our socialist ideals are too big and too broad to get past, that they will never happen in our lifetimes. And it is our opportunity to show they can work by continually acting with these groups, but also by winning local elections and implementing policies and showing them that these ideas work and are winnable and are workable. And that's all I'll say on that.
Thanks, Jabbar. I just wanted to welcome Bianca. Bianca joined us. Hi, Bianca.
Hey everyone, sorry I'm late.
It's all good. So we were just talking about Bernie's campaign and the struggles that Bernie's campaign had with Black voters. And I guess I'll let you jump on this question if you want, but what do you think happened there, and what do you think the socialist left needs to do about this problem? Because I think it's not one that's going to go away without us putting a concerted effort into it.
Sure. So I just want to thank y'all for having me. And like I said, I apologize for being late. Yeah, this is really interesting because it brings me back to fond memories of going with the Afro Socialists and Socialists of Color Caucus down to South Carolina, because we felt like we really, wanted to try to be the difference or make a difference. Down there, we know that, Black voters got to decide. We had a lot of great conversations, but I think ultimately what I've been thinking about, after that experience, the experience of Bernie losing, obviously, and then, even through defund, is that like we don't have enough examples on the left of like how this shit works. Like when you talk about like infrastructure that exists, because you're talking about like, you know, we have all these great ideas, and it's like, I think that there are ways that we could model this and like on like a local level that I think we're missing an opportunity to do. And so I think that that is actually the challenge before us. And we don't, and for the things that are socialist, like the post office or public school, we don't do enough to point to how they are socialist, why they are socialist, and the fact that they are working, you know, or at least somewhat working. And so I think that we could just do both of those things, create our own infrastructure and create our own alternatives, and like actually start to model how these things would work, and also point to the things that already exist that have been working for so long for so many of us.
Thanks, Bianca. Donnelly, do you want to weigh in on this question about the Bernie campaign?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Some really good points were made, and I think for me, honestly, like what sums it up is that like Bernie's campaign was very much grassroots, but it was grassroots with its funding, not with its policy making. And I think that this is not unique to Bernie's campaign. This is an issue, I think, fundamental to electoralism, right? And it's where campaigns are extracting labor and resources and not inputting labor and resources into Black communities, right? And I just remember me particularly, you know, I work with public housing tenants, and you know, I work closely with AOC's office to develop the Green New Deal for public housing, which was co-sponsored by Bernie Sanders. And I remember when we got on a call, this was late in the campaign when they were about to come to New York with Bernie's team, and they were like, "Hey, great, look, we have resources for you guys to phone bank for Bernie in the hood." And I'm like, yo, bro, like, shouldn't this be the other way around, right? Like, what do you have to offer us, right? How are you going to invest in us so that people have feel like they have a stake in the campaign, right? And I'm constantly thinking about my homies in the hood, and they're like, yo, you know, what has he ever done for us, right? Has he ever been here? I remember when Bernie came to Queensbridge to speak, the Tenants Association president in Queensbridge was like, oh, Bernie didn't tell us anything. He told me 2 days ago and called for a meeting 2 days ago, right? And she was upset about that. You know, meaningfully, Bernie did reach out, but he should have reached out months ago, maybe even years ago, right? So that we can start building from the ground up outside of electoral campaigns to get the support for a guy like this. Because I just keep thinking about, like, particularly in my community, right? I'm in Astoria, I'm in Western Queens. You know, we have like, you know, the JVBs and the GNRSs, but particularly like these are guys who like have been throwing bones to people in the hood, who have that rapport with people in the hood just because they show face, right? There hasn't really been anything meaningful, but they know who they are, right? And they're like, when you're a community that's been deprived for so long and they throw you a bone, you're gonna scavenge that bone, right? So Bernie needs to come with pounds of meat, pounds of plants and food and all that good stuff, and give it to the people, like straight up. And this is true for all campaigns writ large. We need to start thinking about how can these campaigns be hubs for the democratization of resources and the reallocation of resources in our hoods, straight up. That's what it needs to be, right? And I think that, you know, this being a presidential campaign, being national in character, it's fundamentally top down and it's so far removed from the ground, right? When we start electing more, you know, radical progressive socialists into office, like the homie Jabari and the slate that we have in the legislature right now, we're going to start putting, you know, the local candidates into power that's going to have the relationships with the communities in this way that will allow us to have connections that are much more grassroots, from much more bottom up to national campaigns, right? Bernie comes in and endorses everyone in New York. What's that mean, right? We had comrades who ran for office who was endorsed by Bernie and it didn't do anything, right? So this is how we need to start thinking about not just, our presidential campaigns, but our local campaigns. And we need to start thinking about how, our campaigns are ones that, provide resources and labor into the hood and not the other way around.
Can I just piggyback off something Donnelly just said? Sorry, I know I already went.
Go ahead, Bill.
So, why we were in South Carolina was because there was a black staff person, field manager that was like our campaign. Y'all know what I'm talking about. She was like on our call saying like they only had 3 open offices in South Carolina compared to 300 in Iowa. So you tell me already that, like, I'm sorry, like, I love Uncle Bernie too, y'all, but we got to be honest about where the investment was, to Donnelly's point. And, they weren't even willing to pay her to relocate when they asked her after they lost South Carolina to go to Atlanta and work that election. So first and foremost, we have to be honest about where the investment actually went. And I also just want to recount another experience that I had, which is like when he first launched the second presidential campaign, he came to Brooklyn and he met with activists, and I happened to be one of the 20 activists that was in the room, along with like your NYCC folks and your Sunrise folks and et cetera, all of our people, right? And in that meeting, somebody from Make the Road asked him about his position on ICE, because he didn't actually support the abolition of ICE. And he doubled down on that position and said that he thinks that we need DHS and he thinks that they need to be expanded. And Linda Sarsour was in the meeting and she was in the back and she said, "Senator, with all due respect, I want to let you know that you asked us to put the most active, most left, most movement people in front of you. And the reason that they're trying to bring this up to you is because that's where we're all at. So you need to come to where we're at." And just really put it out there. And it was like uncomfortable, right? And we were all like, the room was so quiet, y'all, because we were all like just actually so disappointed with the answers that he was giving, like in the flesh, right? But I think that is also the same disappointment that I felt every time I would see him speak on TV, and he just didn't nail it when it came to race. He just didn't say that, he didn't go all the way in the way that he could, right? He didn't go in like the way that he needed to. He skipped the Selma anniversary, y'all. The Selma anniversary, that stuff matters. And so I think that we just need to be thinking about that as like we're thinking about who will be the next candidate. We can't make those types of like simple mistakes or simple we can't make decisions like that.
I want to kind of share an anecdote of mine, personally, because I also went to South Carolina to canvass for Bernie, and I was struck by it. Yes, there were 3 offices. It didn't seem like there was a lot of infrastructure on the ground there, given the fact that we knew from 2016 how poorly the campaign did in southern states where demographically the Democratic Party is overwhelmingly black. It seems like they would have known this is where we need to put some investment, because in hindsight, they should have known from before, but like, look, that's where it turned. That's where it turned this time around. Biden won South Carolina, and the narrative was after that was just like, Bernie's dead, it's gonna be Biden, that's it. But I think when I was canvassing, and I was talking with black folks at doors, they said a lot of what folks have been saying. It's like Danelli said, we've knocking on my door every 4 years to try and get somebody to try and get me to vote for somebody. That's not going to cut it. But then the other thing is, you had Clyburn, make his endorsement at a pivotal moment. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about the black political establishment, because it doesn't just exist, federally. It exists locally. It exists in New York City. Some members of that black political establishment, called DSA, which we're all part of, a gentrifier movement, and try to drive a wedge between black identity and socialist politics, both at the ballot box and various electoral contests we've had in the city, but also in the streets around the vote over the police budget. So what do we make of this? Why are multiracial movements for justice so often attacked nowadays as being white? Are these attacks on our movement effective? And either way, how do we overcome them? I'm gonna go to Jabari on this, because I know you felt this firsthand.
Where should I start? Yeah, no, we I don't know. So, I mean, there's very clearly, a Black establishment that is invested in the current structure because it benefits where they're at. Because they have achieved a position of power within it. They don't want to change anything or upset that balance. For those who don't know, my specific experience was I had a city council member lead a demonstration outside my home the day before the election, calling me like the leading face of like this white gentrifier movement that was coming together. They had a member refer to me as a nigger coon on the steps of my own apartment building, because people. It's funny, when we talk about like power corrupting, it's like people in this black, the misleadership class and this political establishment have had a taste of power, and I'm repeating myself. It's within this capitalist structure that is benefiting them particularly, and they like that, and they don't want to upset that system because they might lose their little piece of the pie. And it's really frustrating because we have people out here that are desperately trying to do something that would actually bring working class power to the masses and bring true Black liberation. And then you got people saying, Black this, Black that, Black this. Meanwhile, their local politician, signing off yes on every single development inside the community, even if it gentrifies half of the Black people out of that zip code. So it's kind of disgusting, but it is something we are up against and something we need to continually and prepare. Honestly, that it's not going to go away. Like this is going to be a thing. It's going to be a thing in the coming months. It's going to be a thing in 2021. So we need to figure out how we're adapting to it because it's going to be a line of attack that's going to keep on coming back.
Sorry, I was muted. Bianca, I was going to ask you, what do you think about this problem?
Yeah, so it just really like boils my blood, I have to say. Like, I really, really, really hate that. But I think that I have to be honest and say that we're in this position because unfortunately in 2020, we're still at the point where we can say this is the first Black blah, blah, blah. This is the first Muslim council person. This is the first, and for so many who have been desperate to see themselves themselves reflected in leadership and in representation in elected office, that would be enough. I mean, Lori Kumble's not wrong, right? Like the city council woman who went outside Jabari's door was wrong in everything she said, but she was right in the fact that her and Una Clark and other local Black women had to fight so hard to just get elected, right? And that doesn't erase the racism and the patriarchy that they experience in that system, right? And so when we're talking about that, I feel like the only way that we can combat that is by showing that you can do politics differently. I think that's the only way. And I think just staying on message. This is such a hard thing too, because I remember we had that press conference where we wanted to call out the Black electeds that were not going to vote to defund the police. And it's this thing in the Black community where it's dang, I'm disrespecting my elders. Also, it's hard to be a Black woman in America. I'm not really trying to come for anybody, And I think that we just need to, and at the end of the day, it's not even about that. It's not personal. She made it personal, but it's not personal. It's just, we just need to stick to the ideas and to the issues, I feel like. We can't ever play their identity kind of game that they play. We need to stick to what we're good at and make sure that as we're electing people that they're delivering. And that's the only, I think, anecdote to push back. Or that's the only way to push back against that kind of behavior. I agree with Jabari. I've been saying it. One of the things that we saw in the George Floyd protest is how overwhelmingly white they are. I actually don't think that's a problem. I would like to see more people of color, Black people in the streets, but it is what it is. People in the streets is people in the streets to me, as long as there's some good, firm leadership, and they're taking leadership from the right folks. But y'all, it matters sometimes who shows up, in the streets to be as we're taking this stuff on. I remember there was this whole issue last year with Vocal New York, which is this local organization that we work with here, was doing something on fair campaign financing and trying to target the speaker of this of the Carl Hastie. I don't know what he is the speaker of, but I'm not into politics, y'all. But he's the speaker of something. And we went and I got a call and I said, they said we really want you or AfroSoc or whoever to come out. We need specifically Black and brown people to come out and support us in this fight. We're gonna rally outside one of his 2,500 a plate dinners, right? And it's they're like really worried about the optics, because what Carl Heatsey had done was talk to Al Sharpton and get the National Action Network goons to come out as a full black like a full black crowd to then counter protest our protest. And you know how uncomfortable, and you know, even if we put the call out, there was probably only on our side of fair campaign finance, there was a whole lot of white people and maybe like 5 black people. And you know how uncomfortable it was for us to sit there face to face with teenagers, black teenagers, as they yelled at us and called us coons, as they said, you know, we're not for black power and all these other things, right? And so it's really uncomfortable. We would have been in a better position had we actually had the numbers to show that black people and brown people support this issue, right? And so I think like rapid response networks, like wherever you are, get yourself a black and brown comrade rapid response network that y'all can show up as a contingency, whether it's 10 people, whether it's 5 people, whether it's 20 people. I just think that we need to like be like ready for what's about to come, particularly in New York City, but I think everywhere.
Thank you, Bianca. Cheryl, what do you think?
Bianca said it's not personal. It's personal to me. I don't care. Miss Laurie, I you know, have nothing good to say about her. Literally nothing. And some nerve that she has, for real. I don't care how many pairs of 10s people like Kamala, Laurie, whatever have. Like, that don't mean nothing to me. Like, oh no, you so black, whatever. The system always has use for some helpers, and these are some helpers. So who are you really helping? I believe a lot of this comes from the deliberate misrepresentation of our black leaders of the past. So you are not a continuation of our black leadership of the civil rights movement, Laurie, and all others. Like, how all of those people were communists. So if you're a black capitalist who helps gentrify your neighborhood, who helps expand police power, who won't destroy these systems around you, you are not a continuation of our civil rights leaders of this previous generation who fought so that you could now be in the position that you are in. In fact, you're disrespecting their legacy. So that's what I have to say to them. You know, she's not gonna hear it, but we don't need her to hear it. I think the way we need to push back is political education, because people need to understand what this history really is, and that this movement, these people, us black people, because we're all black on this call. I don't care how many times she says you a coon. She can't take that away from us. We are the real continuation of this revolutionary spirit that is going to change the world, that has changed the world. So that's what I have to say about them. I think also about, like, visually, is this movement looking white in the streets? It may, but I saw a lot of black people out there. One, I think it's also kind of like a numbers game, like how many black people are there? But I also think it's that black people sometimes aren't in the street at these actions, some of these actions, some of my friends have said, because they're afraid. And they're afraid in ways that white people are not afraid. A sentiment that I've heard a lot of times out in the street from white people around me, my comrades in the street, is surprise. They are surprised that the police tried to run us over. They're surprised that they're beating us. They just said disperse, and now they're immediately beating us. Like, what's going on? This isn't right, you know? And they're not wrong for being surprised. I'm like, it's wrong, but also I'm not surprised. Like, black people are not surprised. They're like, they're gonna beat your ass. I'm not gonna go out there because I'm scared. White people get out there and a car runs them over, and they're like, I didn't know they could do that. We know they can do that. Like, they can do that. So I think there's a level of fear that black people are approaching these like protests, and maybe there's some wait and see. So I think that's the work of the people who are in the struggle. We need to be able to say, like, we're stronger together, because truly it is scary. It's scary out here, but we have strength in numbers. So we need those numbers. But I understand why black people may be wary to like join in the street in these movements. And so why visually this movement is made up of what looks like a lot of young white people. And then also from like a standpoint of people who have time to be in the streets right now. So a lot of people have lost their jobs. A lot of people, black people and white people. But I will say that a lot of the people who were still going to work throughout this pandemic, the essential workers, are people of color, or black people. So a lot of these people were also like, I don't have time. I have a job. Like, and my job, my minimum wage job, is not gonna allow me to be in the street like this. I am a person who works a 9 to 5, and I'm remote now at an office. So I was just like using the DOE's time to like go out and protest, but like not everybody can do that. So this is definitely also a class thing. So we have to think, a lot of Black people are in a economic class, an economic position where they could not be off work in these streets. That doesn't mean that the fight isn't a fight that benefits them. So I think we need to do the political education to make that clear, to also make it clear that we are the continuation of the legacy of the Black revolutionaries of the past. This is it. It's not gentrifying, making Bedford Armory into some damn apartments. Like, she can keep that, but.
Donnelly, go ahead.
I love that energy, Cheryl, because I very much feel the same way, straight up. Who are the real gentrifiers? They are. They are the real gentrifiers. They're the ones who are implementing the policies at the heist of the developers and the pigs in the city. All right. So when the Black political establishment here in New York City begins to weaponize identity politics against an intersectional, racial and class justice movement, we're building power. Straight up. They're scared out of their boots and they're just running to wherever they can to attack us because they're losing points. Here's the reality. You can't be representing Black people if you're taking money from pigs. You can't be representing Black people if you're taking money from real estate developers. And they're banking off the lack of class consciousness that exists within Black people. That's really what it is. They are exploiting that straight up to create a rift between people positioned within the same class interest. Black people and white people, white poor people specifically, right? And that's what's happening. Straight up, I remember I led a march to Daniel Drum's home alongside Queen's DSA, right? And they ran and the entire Black caucus in the city council, came into his support. And we came back, we clapped back. We had that press conference. Bianca was there, BLM New York was there. We had a whole host of people and we called a spade a spade. And the reality is you cannot be working within the interests of Black and poor people in this city, in this country, if you're taking the bag from the real estate development and from the police, point blank, period. Because these people are the people who are working towards the gentrification of our communities, point blank, period. And you know what? Here's the thing. I generally don't extend good faith to institutional actors, politicians, but maybe I can to the Black and brown ones. I get it. Like, you have secured your individual wealth and your well-being and your family's well-being, and capitalism has sustained that for you, right? But we're in a point in time where we can no longer proceed with the same politics. And you know what? I can extend an arm and be like, hey, you can change your politics, right? You are still Black. You are still oppressed in many ways, right? You might have been able to get away from some of the class issues, right? Because of, your position in the political class, but you are still oppressed in many ways. And maybe you can change your politics. But if you don't, we're removing you. You're gone. The people are going to move you, and they're going to try to create a rift within DSA because we got a bunch of white folks who are privileged enough to hit the damn streets while Black people are busy working or tending to their communities and their families. They don't got time to go to marches, right? Like, they don't have the space or the emotional bandwidth to deal with this because we've been oppressed for so goddamn long, right? And traumatized for so goddamn long. Every day I go to a protest, I have to constantly be in conversation with myself about the space that I'm in because I'm concerned any given second I can be attacked and I can be killed by a police officer, right? But that's a decision that I've made personally to do that, right? But no Black person or no movement should be penalized because Black people aren't in the streets for this as much as our white comrades. It's an issue of privilege and the positionality that people have with respect to these protests and these movements. But at the end of the day, they're trying to use identity politics as a shield. They're trying to weaponize it against us because we're building an intersectional race and class movement. And we just need to stick to that, straight up.
Thank you, Donnelly. Related to this, so something that I think we're going to be seeing, and we have seen already with our defund work, This is a question coming from the chat. Is about how working class, Black communities don't necessarily like buy into the abolitionist or defund demand. There's polling that says to the contrary. Black folks want police. I think maybe they want safe neighborhoods, but they want police. So I guess I'm wondering, what do your parents or relatives, family members, how do they feel about demands for abolition, for defunding the police, since it's not really necessarily a majoritarian position right now? And how can we make sure that we win all generations, I guess, of working class Black people to the kind of program we're talking about? Cheryl, I'll go to you. You've been doing this work, trying to politically educate people around defund.
Yeah, my relatives are on board because I browbeat them into it, so they're gonna just have to get on board. You can't be at the dinner with me talking about some we need cops. No, but really it just takes like a conversation, because we start from, my cousin was like, she said, y'all said defund, but you mean like not get rid of the police? I said, no, we mean get rid of the police. She said, but why? Like, what happens when like something real bad happens? I said, what happens right now? She's like, you right. It took that long before we got to an entry point where I could be like, what happens today? Like, if somebody broke into your car the day, who you gonna call? I was like, the cops? She said, no. I was like, your brother, right? Yes. Like, it's not really working for us. So I think we're not immune as a group of people to the propaganda. We are not immune to the constant narrative that we're being fed. Sometimes by this Black establishment and by a white supremacist state, that crime is happening because of like us, like the community, and we need some policing to keep us safe. That's really what's gonna like solve the issues that we're facing, because Black people are facing the brunt of what happens when a society does not center care for everyone. So we are, being mugged and getting our shit broken into and experiencing like murders and violence on the street. But so we're not immune to like the propaganda of why those things are happening, which is why I think some Black people are reluctant to like defund or abolish the police. So I really just think it takes conversations to, first of all, let's identify really, why are these things happening to us? Like, what is the source of this? And then, second of all, to really point out something that a lot of the people I talk to very easily come to, which is that, okay, this is the stuff that's happening in our community, the bad things that are happening to us that we don't feel, that make us feel not safe, that keep, that ruin our lives. Are police and prisons helping that? Like, is policing solving those issues? Because the answer is no for everyone. Policing is not solving these issues. Domestic violence isn't solved by policing because it still exists. There's still like break-ins and stuff. And we're living in a world also where crime is on like the downswing overall, and yet you still see an increase in policing. So, when you bring up these logical facts, I do think you find a lot of people come around. To have this conversation, though, I know it's hard, but we're going to have these conversations. And I think we can't also, another kind of side note here is that sometimes policing or police force has, in certain cities, like New York City, they made a campaign to hire a lot of cops of color, a lot of Black cops and stuff. And this has put a face on a repressive, racially oppressive kind of like force, put a Black face on it. And that makes it hard for us to sometimes be like, are all cops bad? And yes, they are. Like, quit your job if you're not bad. But I think it makes it difficult when you have these middle class type jobs, because police officers make good money, and it's kind of a blue collar job that people of color, such as Black people, can get into in certain cities. We have to concentrate as socialists on what are the alternatives, like to providing like pathways for Black people to good jobs, that aren't like something like being a police officer or relatedly being a prison guard. These kinds of things, these systems that exist and oppress us, but also sometimes provide some of us with some opportunities to stability. So it has to be addressed like through political education and talking about this system as a whole. That's how I've approached it. But personally, my family's on board. I'm not fighting at the dinner table about this. I really encourage everybody to start your fight at home. How you out in the streets talking about this and that, you can't even talk about it with your mama. Definitely, everybody talk to your mama about this. I'm very pro talking to your mama about the police. Start there. It's a good practice.
Bianca, what about you?
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I mean, it's making me think, like, my dad did like 30 years in the Air Force, and I remember having a conversation with him about police brutality like a year ago, and he's like totally on board and like totally disgusted with like the police and like the government, just period. So they're always defending me, being like, no, go ahead, you're right. I think that people are presented with this false choice where it's like police or crime. Like, that's a false choice. But of course, people are going to say police because nobody wants to say crime, right? And to your point, what they're wanting is safe neighborhoods. I remember having this conversation with one of my comrades from Critical Resistance, and she was just like, listen, she's a trans woman, she identifies as trans, and she's like, I'm not trying to defund the police so that I can get my ass beat in the street. Like, this is cultural work. This is actually a cultural shift that needs to happen within our society. And also, it's sad because Critical Resistance is like the mother of like the abolition, or not the mother, but like they've been moving this work so much. And like even hearing them say, like, who is actually doing this cultural work to move us towards a society that could have less police, that could abolish the police altogether? Who's doing that work? And everything is crickets. Everybody's looking at each other. And I think some of this is being filled by the nonprofit industrial complex, which has its own set of issues that come along with it. And so I think that, like, thinking about, this goes back to the infrastructure question. How can we build infrastructure on a local level that shows and starts to kind of shift how we think about one another and how we think about ourselves and our own positions, within our own roles within society. So I'll leave it there. And also, I have to go. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm working today. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for spending some time with us, Bianca.
All right.
Thanks, B.
Bye.
Peace, B.
Donnelly, what are your thoughts about this? As a family.
Yeah, man. First generation Dominican. My parents, they really don't have the awareness, right, that I do, in all of this, right? My father walks down the street, he's white passing. He's not looking over his shoulder thinking about the police, right? He grew up in the Dominican Republic in a campo that to this day still has no infrastructure, let alone police, right? So it's not even a thought, right? So the natural inclination for that is like, we need police to keep us safe. And the same is true for my mother, right? And it's like, she understands firsthand because she's been there every single time as a child where I've had police encounters as a child, right? But a part of her still buys into this idea that we need to have security in our communities, and police is the only way that we can achieve that. But I am an unapologetic advocate against that culture, that idea, and I very much have this conversation everywhere. They're tired of me, to say the least. But they believe in me and they trust me, and I think that they, despite our contrarian nature as Dominicans, we like to be contrarians. They really understand why I fight for defunding the police. They know firsthand because they've experienced it, right? But I'm also thinking about, the grannies in the hood, right, who are just like, oh, they're smoking in my building, right, or they're selling drugs in front of my building, and all these things. And then I'm like, well, why are they selling drugs, right? Why are they hustling? Why are they not at school? Because the system is racist, and it hasn't provided them with the resources educationally to move towards a different direction. Furthermore, the war on drugs is racist. We need to legalize marijuana so that we don't have these issues. We need to invest in public housing in a way where there's community spaces within the hood where people can go do these things. I'm in California right now, everyone's smoking everywhere. There is no problem whatsoever, right? So it comes down to diving into why there is this idea that we need the police in the first place. And when it comes to my community particularly, it has to do with conditions of poverty. Point blank, period. Why are people hustling, right? Why do we have crime in the hood? Because we got beef in the hood because people are scavenging for resources that do not exist. And when they do not exist, they have to look to alternatives within the black market where you can't contract, where you can't have any kind of civic process to adjudicate any disagreements. It's guns and fights. Straight up. That's it, right? So, my personal approach is I ask questions. I employ a Socratic method where it's like, why are these people doing this, right? And I don't think a lot of us think about it in this way, right? Particularly, the older folks in the community, they just see it at face value, and that's not random. That's also, again, a racist educational system that does not enlighten us about our class position and the reason why these things exist in the first place. So I think that what it ultimately comes down to is really getting at the root as to why we think we need police in our communities in the first place. But when we guarantee dignified housing, right, when people aren't living in mold or without heat and hot water, right, without jobs and having to hustle in the hood so that they can, buy some thermostats to put in the crib so that they can keep themselves warm because they can't get a job, right, because of their criminal record or whatever it is, like, we have to draw these connections. If we ain't drawing these connections, we're speaking to a wall. We're not going to be able to combat the narrative that the police and the law and order, antics like to propel for the justification for policing in our hoods. And until we get that, it's not going to happen. And then Granny ain't going to listen to us if we haven't been in the hood since day one, on top of that, right? Straight up. So we need to build that rapport. We need to be in the streets. We need to be serving people and meeting them where they're at with what they need, and having these conversations to deconstruct and dismantle the colonization of our communities, right? And that's what it comes down to at the end of the day.
Jabari, what do you think about this question?
It's interesting. It's like, like Cheryl, I've had to talk to people in my own family about it. During the campaign, we sent out an email with just the title "Defund the Police." We had a whole list of things about Black Lives Matter and like what it would actually mean to like invest in communities. But it's funny. My sister called me after she saw that email. I was like, Jabari, defund the police. What? The mafia is going to take over. What are you doing? And part of it was like having a conversation about like, let's put that in context, right? Let's just start by like getting rid of the notion that defunding is a radical act. Like stuff gets defunded every single time, all the damn day long. That's not police, right? We're losing teachers here. We're losing hospitals closing down over there. We're losing money for housing over here, right? We're losing money for transportation over here, right? Stuff is getting defunded left and right. So like, let's remove that from a radical position. And then, as a wider conversation for people, what I've had is also kind of something Cheryl said earlier, like what happens now when certain things happen, like getting rid of this notion that police are like Batman, because it's like we have this whole cultural thing where people feel like, oh, if there's a rape happening or a murder happening, like a police person will swoop in right then and there and stop it, That's what they're there for. And like that's not how it works. You know, that's not what they do. And I think the only time I've ever called the police was because I needed a police report to get insurance for this. And, you know, it was because the system is set up in such that you need to reach the police to get a police report to do the, you know, XYZ. So there's that sort of aspect of it. And then a lot of reframing too on just like what Donnelly is saying about like, well, why don't people have the means to have, you know, peaceful communities to begin with? I was at a demonstration on the Upper East Side today at Mike Bloomberg's place. It was a climate action and he needs to pay his fucking taxes. You know, walking out after the end of the demonstration, like walking around the Upper East Side, just seeing what it means to physically be, you can feel it. You can feel the energy in the air in a community where people are not worried that they might get evicted next month, or like not worried about whether or not they'll have health care if they get sick. You can feel the peace that comes with that. That does not come from, because the only cops I saw were the ones following the protest. There were no other cops. They're not just waiting on the street in the Upper East Side waiting to, like, you know, catch somebody do anything. They were there for us because we showed up. So there's a number of peace that can come from just investing in communities. And like it's a lot about reframing political education, talking to people about, one, what the cops really do, which is just wait around and harass people, and then two, what it means to actually invest in communities and the things that make us safe.
Right on. So we're coming to the end of the panel. I got one more question, which is, what does the political revolution mean to you? Is it synonymous with Black liberation? If not, what will it take to make those two political ambitions and projects into something understood to be working together? Donnelly, I'm gonna go to you first.
Yeah, the revolution is Black liberation, straight up. With the understanding that, you know, we can't have Black liberation without, you know, race and class solidarity, right? And building an intersectional movement, one of coalition that recognizes that any society that doesn't provide the most basic, you know, needs, you know, housing, healthcare, education, and work as a guarantee, right? And not just in our conventional, you know, welfare model, right, where we're just dishing out resources in a very means-tested way, but one where people have a stake, people have a power over the resources, have control over the resources in which are being distributed to them, right? Democratization of our resources, right? Community-controlled neighborhoods, buildings and public housing, social housing, right? Having autonomy in our schools, in our educational spaces, right? The people who live there, the people who have stake in it, have a say in what their curriculum looks like and what their day-to-day looks like, right? The same is true in the workplace, right? We need to have that same autonomy in the workplace. It's not enough that we're getting paid a wage. We need equity, right? We need to share in equity, and we need decision-making power, right, in the workplace as well. And until all of these things are met, we're not going to be in a space where we can have true equity in our society, point blank, period, right? And the way that we get there is by doing what we're doing right now, right? It's having this conversation first and foremost, you know, putting out what are the requirements, what do we need, right? What are the resources? And then implementing the process over those resources, whether it's through politics, whether it's in our communities on the ground, day by day, you know, having and sharing community with the people that you live in. I think capitalism has made us lazy in our geographical community building, right? It's like we have access to the internet and social media, and we can plug into networks and spaces that align with us, right? That we're kind of no longer forced to be in community with people that we disagree with people who we may not share values with, who are just annoying neighbors, right? We need to do that. That needs to be done, because if we don't have that, we won't have the buy-in necessary, right, to establish any kind of democratic processes and control over our homes, over our workplaces, over our educational spaces, and so on and so forth. We can't have justice in this world without the liberation of Black people, period. No one will have justice. And I think that's what, coins the term no justice, no peace, right? And as long as, the Black house is burning, that's going to affect the White House, the actual White House and the houses of white people, right? And we need to make sure that it continues to affect the people around us, right? Because that's how we ruffle up the feathers, kick up the dust, and start thinking about how we can build something new in coalition with our community and with all people, not just Black people, before Black people and all people. So I think that's what it comes down to.
Cheryl, you're muted.
I was. Political revolution is Black liberation, I do believe. With what we're in right now is a system of oppressions that's rooted in the socio-political kind of concept of whiteness. Then what a revolution is, I think, is Black imagination. Like, we have to reimagine this world. We have to redefine the social relationships between each other. We have to, and that's for me what abolition is about. Like, it's a building of something in addition to like the destruction of like these systems of oppression. It's really about the building of something new. And I'm not sure we necessarily know exactly what everything looks like. Like, I know that everyone needs to eat, everybody needs to have housing, all these kind of like needs need to be met. But we don't exactly know how this society, this new liberated society will look. And I think the work is to define that together, to imagine together, to really invest our effort and our resources in figuring out how we get there. This isn't work that is done. The revolution doesn't happen. It's not just going to arrive. I'm not of the idea. I don't agree with that. We're just going to arrive at the revolution like inevitably because the conditions around us. I mean, we may arrive at a interruption of like the current system, but how we get to that new world, I really think has to be done consciously, with effort, with imagination, with love for each other, and with focus and attention to each other and the world around us. And we've reached a point, I think, where that disruption of the current system is inevitable, and to push through to the other side on that liberated world, we gonna need some imagination, and we need it now. Like, so this political revolution, I think, is imminent upon us if we want it to happen. We have to grasp that. So that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I'm just gonna add on. I agree with what's been said. They're like intertwined, right? The political revolution is Black liberation, specifically in the vision that we as like Black anti-capitalists know that it's going to be, removing private property, abolishing private property and ensuring we have a democratic control of, how our economy and how our society is run, where it's internationalist, and that we have not kind of like gone astray into there are competing visions of what Black liberation is. And for some people, it's just a world where everyone is, everyone, we have a bunch of Black Oprahs, everyone's a Black Oprah, a bunch of like a wealthy black, billionaire class. For others, it's like it's a strong nationalist sense where, we've liberated, Black people in America, but not Black people abroad in the Caribbean and in Africa and in the global South. We need to ensure that we have a political revolution that is Black liberation, that is tied deeply to understanding that, we are workers of the world and we need to unite, that we are standing in solidarity with our brothers and our sisters and our siblings across the world, and that, the systems that tie us down are actually international in their structures. And it also makes sure, when I talk about these systems, like, we are, getting rid of the capitalist structures that we all live under, and ensuring that we have democratic participation. I mean, a big part of this revolution is people feeling agency to be part of something. I was here listening to Donnelly saying, capitalism has made us like kind of lazy and how we relate geographically, and I feel like it's also made us kind of lazy in how we participate politically, where you get a lot of people that just they want to elect somebody and then that's it. The politicians handle it, right? They don't see democracy as a verb where they continually participate in it. They see democracy as installing the right person, and then they handle it, right? There's this like idol worship, hero worship in politicians. So I do believe there's an action of saying, well, we have this ongoing struggle or this ongoing fight that we are continually building, and I also think it's not as far off as some might think. I think what we learned this year in the midst of COVID-19, I always think back to March and like how on a dime the whole world shifted. How quickly we turned the economy and society on its knees, and that makes me think, well, then a radical revolution can happen next year, and like we can be ready for it if we're willing.
Thank you, Jabari. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Donnelly. Thank you to everybody that's watched. If you enjoyed this, this isn't the end. There's going to be more talks in the speaker series, so I urge you to subscribe, or rather to register in the Eventbrite below on YouTube for more of these conversations. But again, thanks everybody for participating in this. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Justin, and everybody else.
Thanks, y'all. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Peace and love. All power to the people and FTP.
Yes.